If you have enjoyed looking and listening to my books, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Thank you. Disney's Lady and the Tramp, a Ladybird book, first published in 1987. Lady and the Tramp. Jim Dear and his wife Darling lived in a big old house. Darling was lonely during the day when Jim was at work, so one Christmas Jim brought Darling a special present. It was very difficult to keep the present a secret because it snuffled. It was even more difficult to wrap up because it wriggled. It was a little puppy. "She's lovely," cried Darling. "Let's call her Lady." Lady had a lovely Christmas day. At bedtime, Jim tucked her up in a little basket and said, "That's your very own basket, just for you." And then he went upstairs. But Lady was miserable in her very own basket, so she went upstairs and found a much better place to sleep, tucked up in Jim's bed. Lady loved living with Jim Dear and Darling. Every day she woke Jim in time for work and fetched his slippers. She learned to catch the newspaper when the boy on his bicycle threw it to her, and she enjoyed keeping Darling company during the day. Lady also made friends with two other dogs who lived nearby. One was a bloodhound called Trusty, and the other was a terrier called Jock. Lady was very happy. But the best part of the day came when Jim arrived home from work. After supper, Lady would curl up for a little snooze while Jim and Darling sat by the fire. One evening, Lady heard Darling say to Jim, "There are just the three of us now, but it won't be long until the baby makes four." Lady didn't know exactly what babies were, but Jim and Darling made them sound fun. Then one stormy night there was great excitement in the house. A man called Doctor came to see Darling. Soon Jim was shouting, "It's a boy! It's a boy!" And Lady guessed that the baby had come to make four. Next morning, Lady was allowed her first peep at the baby. She was thrilled. But the baby was very tiny, and she wondered what it could do. She stood up on her back legs to get a better view. Darling said, "When the baby gets bigger, Lady, you'll be able to play with him." And Lady wagged her tail. That was just what she'd hoped the baby was for. One day, Jim got out a box and a bag with labels on them. Darling called this luggage, and she filled the box and bags with clothes. Lady was puzzled. Then Jim said, "We're going away for a few days, Lady. Aunt Sarah's coming to look after the baby, and you must help her with the babysitting." He patted her, but for some reason, Lady felt afraid. As soon as Aunt Sarah arrived, Jim and Darling left in a taxi. Lady felt like crying. She was frightened of Aunt Sarah, who seemed very cross. Lady hid behind the door, and when Aunt Sarah was taking her coat off, the little dog dashed upstairs. She wanted to guard the baby from this terrible person who had come to live in the house instead of Jim and Darling. Lady stood up to look in the cot to make sure the baby was still there. But just at that moment, Aunt Sarah came into the room. She thought Lady was trying to get into the baby's cot. Aunt Sarah screamed and whacked at Lady with her broom. Lady dodged, but Aunt Sarah kept whacking away, knocking over tables and anything else that stood in her path. "Get out!" she screamed. "You horrible bad dog, get out!" Lady crept out of the house, her tail drooping and her head bowed. She walked sadly away from home, but had no idea where to go. Once she got in a terrible fright when some fierce dogs bared their teeth at her and growled. She ran and ran, gasping for breath. At last, Lady found a yard behind the railway station where there was no one to shout at her. She flopped down behind a barrel and some old boxes, put her head between her paws, and went to sleep. Early next morning, a train pulled into the station yard and out jumped a big, strong dog. The dog was called Tramp. He had no proper home, but travelled from town to town by riding on trains. Tramp stretched and yawned. "Oh, it's a nice day," he said sleepily. "This new place looks interesting." And then he saw Lady hiding behind a barrel. Tramp blinked and wagged his tail. Lady smiled back shyly. Then Tramp barked. He thought that Lady was beautiful. Lady felt safe with Tramp. She went exploring with him, and soon they came to a chicken farm. Lady had never seen chickens before, but Tramp had. He dug a hole and wriggled under the fence. Then he bounced right into the middle of the chickens. Soon feathers were flying as the chickens tried to get away. When Lady saw what fun Tramp was having, she joined him. Neither of them saw a horse and wagon pulling up alongside the fence. The driver of the wagon crept up behind the two dogs, and Tramp suddenly realised what was happening. "Run, Lady," he barked. "It's the man from the dog's home. Follow me." But Lady wasn't quick enough. The man caught her and threw her into the cage at the back of his wagon. Lady found herself surrounded by strange dogs. She was being taken away, and Tramp wasn't there to help her. Lady was very frightened, but the dogs were friendly and tried to cheer her up. "You'll be safe," they barked. "You've got a collar and a tag with your name on it. Don't worry." The dogs were right. The next day, the man took Lady home. Aunt Sarah wasn't pleased to see her. She chained Lady up outside and yelled, "Stay there! Don't make any noise, or I'll send you back to that dog's home." Lady was too miserable to sleep. She gave a little bark of misery and a sad little howl, but very quietly so that Aunt Sarah wouldn't see her. And then she stiffened. What was that rustling in the leaves? Something was running up the steps to the house. It was a rat, and it was heading for the door. Lady pulled and tugged at her chain, and just as it snapped, there was a low woof. Tramp had been searching for Lady and had heard her sad little bark. Lady was so pleased to see him. She told him all about the rat, and together they raced into the house and up the stairs. They found the rat in the baby's room. It ran under a table, but Tramp knew exactly what to do. Tramp fought with the rat, and the terrible noise reached Aunt Sarah's room. She came rushing in and whacked Tramp with her broom, chased him into the cupboard. Then she turned to deal with Lady. Just as Aunt Sarah lifted her broom to hit poor Lady, there was a voice downstairs calling, "Hello? Anybody home?" It was Jim, dear. Lady almost swooned with happiness. Aunt Sarah went rushing down to Jim and Darling. "I've just found a horrible dog in the baby's room," she cried, "and that dog of yours was no help at all." But Lady took no notice of Aunt Sarah. She barked at Jim dear and jumped up and down, then ran back and forth to the stairs. "She's trying to tell us something," said Darling. Lady led them all to the nursery and showed them the dead rat. She ran over to the cupboard where Tramp was shut in and barked, her tail wagging. Jim dear suddenly realised what she was telling them. "The mongrel was helping Lady to protect our baby," he cried. They opened the cupboard and Tramp crept out, expecting to be beaten. "Good dog," said Jim, and Tramp looked up in surprise. No one had ever spoken kindly to him before. "You must stay with us forever," he heard the kind voice say, and slowly Tramp began to wag his tail. Lady was delighted. Tramp soon became one of the family, and that made 5. He made friends with Trusty and Jock too, and was so big and strong that bully dogs never dared to come near them. Soon it was Christmas again, but this time the best presents of all were, well, one of them looked like Tramp, and the others looked like Lady. But Jim, Darling, the baby, and Lady and the Tramp all thought that the puppies were wonderful, and together they made 6, 7, 8.